I had a conversation with Geoff Johns when I was putting together my Detective Comics run, because Geoff sort of he had meetings with every person who was going to be doing a Rebirth book that sort of, like helped lay out what his priorities were and all of that. But the biggest takeaway was he was talking about character and talking about how you need to boil them down to their barest essence. Like if you look at like a character pyramid of all of their different traits, what is the top stone of that pyramid?
Hi, this is Ross Ritchie. I'm the Chief Executive Officer and the founder of Boom Studios. You would know Boom from a series that we have, Something is Killing the Children, Once and Future, We Only Find Them When They're Dead, and Seven Secrets, as well as Lumberjanes and the upcoming Berserker from Keanu Reeves. So I get to have the second part of my discussion with James Tynion IV, one of the hottest writers in the business right now, who is doing incredible work on Batman. And this session, we get into how he created Punchline. We also managed to talk to him about his creator-owned work at Boom, how he came up with WYND and Something is Killing the Children, as well as his new hit image series, Department of Truth. So there's a lot of great stuff in this interview for people that love craft, that love to know how creators think, how creators write, and all sorts of fun stuff. So I think you're absolutely going to love this episode. Let me remind you that you need to click subscribe and make sure you hit the bell so that when I upload the next creator interview, you don't miss out. So thank you so much. And now here's James Tynion.
Right. So now before we get to that fun moment, let's talk TALON.
Yeah.
So give me some framework, because what a huge moment. I mean, again, you just kid walking in off the street, right? And now you launch a new DC character.
Yeah, that was
DC number one.
And it happened very quickly because it was something that quickly on the tails of them seeing that the Court of Owls was working, they wanted there to be a spinoff of it. They wanted it to be a Talon book. They wanted to create a heroic version of a Talon, which was, like kind of a weird angle to take on the mythology, but it was like, okay, there's my prompt. I can go. I pitched a very weird version of it first that didn't really go anywhere. But then it settled on this idea of this escape artist who had been the Talon and had escaped the organization, and now was coming back to Gotham after the events of the Court of Owls storyline to see whether or not they had actually finally been destroyed, and to see whether or not he could have his life back if this organization was actually dead. And so that sort of set the stage. And it's
how did your name come up in the rotation?
I mean, the real truth is that at that moment, Scott, like, putting Scott's name on a book sold, and if they wanted a Court of Owls spinoff comic that had Scott's name at the top of the masthead, I was the person that Scott trusted to write with him. And so they, so the first 6 issues are like, and I wrote it all. Scott was there to sort of like as the
grandfather.
But I was the writer, but Scott put his name on it to help push it through. And so that led to Talon. And I was really, and that was also the first time I got to work with VM March, whose work I still love, and I'm working with him now on Batman and Gotham stuff.
Incredible artist.
Like, and his stuff is just absolutely incredible. But yeah, no, getting to work with him and to build that book, it taught me a lot. And it was learning, because that was my first ongoing series. And so that was the first time I was figuring out how to pace something that wasn't, and if you go back and read it, the first 3 issues, I think, of Talon are written like backup stories. They're very self-contained because that was how I'd been learning how to write, was in 8-page backup stories. And it was, I think, it's either 3 and 4 or 4 and 5. It was the first time I actually did a proper cliffhanger. That I split the action between 2 issues, and I started realizing the power of using an ensemble cast and intercutting between different characters in an ensemble, which is also one of the first points that my writing style and my strengths diverge from Scott. I think Scott is much better at writing a single character story and getting into the head of like one character and telling their emotional story. I think my strengths lie in ensembles. I love a big cast, and I love intercutting around a big cast, and I love creating tension and momentum by how you intercut. And it really was like in writing those issues for the, like, I figured out, I felt like I could see the Matrix. All of a sudden it was just like, this is how I can write a comic book. And I had the freedom, thanks to Scott, like to write it the way that I kind of saw fit. And then, what happened then shortly thereafter is I was just like, okay, I'm ready for Scott's name to come off the book after the first arc, and I'm going to be the head writer of it. And at that moment, they had also, like, I was pitching at the time to try to do a Red Robin Tim Drake series. But a bunch of things happened very quickly. And I started, like, so I ended up, rather than taking on a Red Robin series, I ended up taking on Red Hood and the Outlaws. They basically shifted me over to that. I pitched a version of that I'm still very proud of, and then had to do something that was a bit more of a Frankenstein monster of my ideas and their ideas. And suddenly I didn't have the protective balloon of Scott, like a umbrella of Scott, to push back against editorial notes and working with different people in editorial whose tastes didn't really align with me, and also who were much more of the school of, who the fuck is this 25-year-old kid to come in and do any of this stuff.
Right.
And so, like, the second half of Talon, and there were a million other things going on. We had the build up to Forever Evil, which had a bunch of, like, building up towards a big superhero event, which then, they give you some of the pieces you need to set up, and then they change their minds 3 issues in about what those pieces are meant to set up. And then they give you a piece saying you have to elevate it, and then they take that piece away from you. There was a lot of back and forth that, ended up kind of compromising what my vision was for Talon. And, I don't think I ever got to do what my vision was for Red Hood and the Outlaws. And I'm proud of what I made out of both experiences, but that was a huge learning experience in and of itself.
Yep. Because you're playing with somebody else's toys.
Yes.
And they have corporate objectives, which, as an owner of a corporation, I'm not using like a dirty word. Yeah. They just literally have their company that they have plans, and they're going to go in certain directions.
Yeah.
And then they've kind of got to deal with how to get everybody on board. And sometimes it's done smoothly, and sometimes it's done with a hammer. So, and that's just life. So, okay. So now let's make the creator-owned transition.
Yeah. So it would have been like right at around the moment that I started my Red Hood and the Outlaws run. I was about 6 issues into the Talon run. It would have been, I think at that point, C2E2 was still in February.
Yeah.
And I got an email saying that a Mr. Ross Ritchie and Mr. Matt Gagnon,
he says, so this is my editor-in-chief for those that don't know. So he pronounces it Gagnon.
Gagnon. Okay.
Yeah, he says Gagnon. I call him Gagnon, which is, it's a French name. And so that's the French pronunciation. Yeah. And so I can do whatever the hell I want because it's my damn company. So I call him Gagnon. I think he likes it. I hope he's never objected. I'll put it like that. So, but yeah, so Matt Gagnon shoots an email over. Yes.
Yeah. And says that Boom wants to meet with me and wants to have a conversation. And so we have a conversation at at C2E2, and it's a really good conversation. Like I think there's good chemistry, and also I appreciated the fact that you guys were the only people chasing me at that point.
Yep.
And you saw potential in my work and were interested in what sort of stories I was interested in telling. And so, and then so one thing that had been happening concurrent to all of that was and this had been happening on sort of the back burner. So at the year prior, right when I was first breaking in, I had gotten a great piece of advice from Scott, who, because I had the realization, I'm writing these backups, they've approved TALON, who knows where this could all go. I need to get creator owned out there. I need to put together a story that is, that will start to get my essence out into the world. And Scott gives me the piece of advice where it's just like, if you could only write one comic book a month for the rest of your life, what would that comic book look like? And his answer was American Vampire, because American Vampire could run forever, and it would, and arc to arc, he could explore different corners of American history and Americana, and do all of the weird stuff with monsters and horror that is in literally every Scott Snyder comic. And it's just like that book embodies who he is, and it's just, and he was asking, like, what is the book that embodies who you are? And so I start putting thoughts together, and I put together the first pitch for The Woods.
Wow.
And The Woods is like, so for those who don't know, because it's been a few years now, The Woods is a story about a high school transported into the middle of an alien forest, and all of the kids trying to figure out how to survive and how to get home. And it's a big series. It's a 36 issue series. And it is and it's a big ambitious beast. And I pitched it as a big ambitious beast. And initially I pitched it back like when I first started, because it was my only outlet at that point. I pitched it to Vertigo. And I was this kid who had only written a couple of backup stories, coming in and saying, I would like to pitch a multi-year epic that was kind of in the YA space, which isn't the sort of thing that Vertigo published at all. And they were, I got some really great notes. Greg Lockard was who I was talking to about it at the time when he was at the company. And, but they ended up actually putting me in touch with a book, one of their friends in the book market, Seth Fishman, to see if I wanted to pitch it as a novel series, and not even as a graphic novel, just do it straight up. And so I was sort of considering that, but my day job was DC. So I was focused on the DC stuff, and that had sort of fallen by the wayside. And then you guys come to me and you say, like, James, do you have something? Do you have something in your back pocket? And it's like, and what you guys were asking for was a 4-issue miniseries. That's the shape of the thing that was the standard Boom, creator owned, especially for a creator who was just coming up like I was. And instead I send you this pitch that's for a series that's a multi-year epic that at its shortest length could be 12 issues, and that would be 12 issues ending on a cliffhanger.
Well, I'll tell you a moment I vividly remember. So I remember sitting down in the bar and having a great conversation. And then, Matt is very much a child of 90s DC. And when I say that, I mean, it's Tim Drake Robin, it's Kyle Rayner Green Lantern, it's the next generation of heroes, Connor Hawke, Green Arrow, it's young protagonists. And I remember him saying, we were talking to you and him saying, I really love, sort of young protagonists and teenage, you might have used that actually, sort of teenage characters and teenage stories. And I remember how you lit up, and I expected some discussion, but you were like, yep. And I remember your whole face changing. because it's not necessarily an area that is really explored in periodical comics.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that there's great lineage with, you know, the X-Men were originally teenagers. Later on, they aged up, but you know, certainly the new Teen Titans, it's in the title.
Yeah.
So, so there's a lot of publishing traditionally in the history of teenage characters. Certainly, Peter Parker was, you know, the whole. I don't know if you're aware, but Stan's original idea was, you know, that the audience is not Batman's age, and Batman's loosely 30.
Yeah.
You know, the audience is Robin's age. So let's do a story that's the audience's age, which is why Peter Parker is Robin the comic book.
Right.
That was its original concept. So,
yep.
So anyway, but I just remember really vividly that moment of like, oh, there's a connection here creatively about, you know, that the specifics of that. And, you know, I was sort of in for the ambitious, and I was in for the sort of let's try something that has the younger protagonists, and that I was aware of the history, and there's not a lot in the space. I have always been hooked on the high concept and the pure power of, you know, a Midwestern high school is transported to an alien planet with no explanation, and it gets Lord of the Flies real fast. Like I grew up in, my mom had a comic shop, a gift shop in San Antonio, and 15, I'm behind the counter, and a customer walks in, and you can say hi, and if you have something by the cash register, you better know how to pitch it. And so when I heard the Woods, and I knew that that's what the story was, I was like, 15-year-old standing behind the counter, you walk in the shop, I know how to pitch that.
Yeah.
Right? And that's when you had me. So back to your side of the story.
Well, and you know, you guys approved it.
Yep.
And not only did you approve it, you approved it as a guaranteed 12-issue run. And that was something that, like, right then, and that, like, you made that part of the selling point to retailers, was if you get people in on this title, like, we will make sure that it, you know, you have something that you can sell for 12 months.
Yep.
And that was a huge part of the you know, the sales point of the series. And you know, it was an exciting moment at Boom in general, because this
Absolutely.
was also around the launch of Kaboom.
Yep.
I think Lumberjanes launched 1 month before the Woods.
Yep.
And so the Woods launched, and I know it launched very strong, which at that point meant 10,000 copies.
I think we were more in we might have been 12, but I want to say more 15. But it's all splitting hairs. Fair. It was a great launch.
Yeah. And I know it and then once we were up and running, you approved the series to run for, like, we sat down and figured out, like, okay, this is a series, like, I can tell the full story in 36 issues.
Yep.
That's the story I'm setting out to tell. And that got the rubber stamp. And
you and I've never connected on this, so this will just be fun. I don't know that anybody will find it interesting, but I still remember Matt coming to me going, like, James wants to know how much rope he has. And I was like, he's got rope until it stops selling, you know, because, you know, it's like, we've got to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
Like, he wants to know how many issues are you going to give him? And I'm like, well, go do a projection. And it was like, well, he wants 36. I was like, what? Are you kidding me? But, you know, I was the guy that approved it at the end of the day. So, but I just still remember the power of, he wants 36 issues. What?
Yeah. No, and it also thankfully coincided with an exciting moment for me over at DC, which was, and I'm very grateful for this, because there's an alternate universe where, like, if I had just been on Talon and Red Hood and the Outlaws, I probably would have petered out at DC around that point. But thankfully, someone had the lunatic idea to do a weekly Batman comic.
Right.
And
that's a big moment. Yep.
And so Batman Eternal launched. I think they launched the same month. I think it's both in April 2014. And so both The Woods #1 and Batman Eternal #1 launched there, and also, like, even though, and Batman Eternal sort of put me back under that protective Scott umbrella that then gave me the leeway to shape that story how I saw, like, how I wanted to run, like, a Gotham story. And so that, which is how, even though this was not the intention from the higher ups, I effectively was running the writing room of Batman Eternal. Working with I was working with incredible writers. We were working with John Layman, Tim Seeley, Ray Fox, and then ultimately Kyle Higgins came in. And so we had
all talented guys. Yeah.
And so we had this really strong base. But I was the one sort of laying out. I was the one who wrote the 20-page series Bible that laid out, here's all the characters, here's how they all interconnect, here's how we can break off into different things, and everyone brought their own essence into that story. But that's the book that leveled me up internally at DC when they realized that it wasn't Scott running the show, it was me. And they started realizing that if they did, in the same way that's I think there have been a lot of people in a lot of places who have had to go into the boss's office and say, James wants to know how much rope he has. I always want to know, because I like long form storytelling. I like being able to decompress and stretch things out. And I always want to know, how much room do I have to to set all of these pieces in motion. With a weekly, I knew I had 52 issues, which is a lot of issues. And so I was able to build something long form that played with all of those pieces. And then that would lead into Batman and Robin Eternal, which then would lead into my Detective Comics run.
Wow.
From that's 2014 to 2016.
Yep.
So
that's very powerful. Very, very powerful. Then you do Mimetic, Cognetic.
Yes.
And that trilogy with us during that time period.
Yeah.
And then
no, you go.
So so I remember the Detective launch was huge.
Yes.
I don't know if you want to go into some of that.
Yeah, no, it was a really exciting time. Because Scott was coming to the end of the New 52 Batman run. And the DC had made the decision that books were going to be going to bi-weekly.
Wow. Yeah.
And that was, that was a scary decision.
I was about to say, knowing you the way I do, I could see how you would not be scared by that. But I remember having a lot of conversations with Paul Levitz about, a guy who knows a thing or two about DC Comics, about publishing at that clip. And Paul was very vocal about the stress that it can put a writer under.
Yes.
And him being, it was a huge mainstream superhero writer for most of his career, certainly was one of the top 3 in the 80s. And, a guy that's seen it and, thinking about, I'm obviously much more of a publisher. So I'm like, hey, are we doing this or not? And some of the creative considerations on that end are, I don't have as much experience, facing the thresher. But it is fascinating to hear from you that was an intimidating proposition.
Yeah. But I mean, the counter to that was I was one of the only people in the room who had been working on a weekly for the year and a half leading up into.
What a godsend.
So I was used to working at the very fast clip. I was used to having to write issues ahead of, basically writing issue 3 and issue 7 simultaneously.
Yep. And explain really briefly why you do that, why that's called for in superhero comics.
A lot of time it's artist schedules. And this is especially true on a weekly or a bi-weekly project, but most artists, that it takes them, it's very rare to find an artist who like steadily do an issue in 4 weeks. Most artists these days work at somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks per issue. And so when they're working 6 to 8 weeks per issue, there comes a moment where you have to bring in another artist to keep the book coming out on a steady schedule. Yep. So that when that happens, you have to start working ahead, and you have to basically keep feeding. You have to always keep your artists fed. That is a comic book writer's job. Is you can never, if someone is waiting on you for pages, like, you're screwing things up. And I've been known to screw things up every now and then. But it is like that's the real goal, is you need to keep the beast fed.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, all right. So then let's have some fun here and start to turn it up a little bit. And let's hop forward and talk what I'm sure the audience wants to hear, which is Punchline.
Yeah.
Why don't you give me the setup? Tom is cycling off of Batman. You have some familiarity with the characters. Let's hear it.
Well, there were a bunch of different threads that kind of like feed into it, because, for one, I was reaching, like, this was always going to be an interesting kind of cliff, because I bet, I had, I think in 2019, or maybe even 2018, so it would be 19, 20, 21. So yeah, it would have been in 2018 that I was done with my Detective Comics run. I was starting on Justice League Dark and doing shorts, like fill-in issues for the bi-weekly Justice League title. And like Scott and I and Josh Williamson had laid out this whole plan that would culminate in a second metal event. And we sort of had this big plan. But things were a little chaotic internally at DC. And I was starting to feel a little burned and feel a little like I didn't know how much longer I wanted to be writing superhero comics, to be perfectly blunt. And there was a moment where my contract, my exclusive contract with DC Comics was about to elapse, and I was considering just sort of letting that happen. But I also knew that I had, I knew that it takes about a year to 2 years to bring a creator-owned title from concept to release. A year is a very short turnaround. 2 years is much more common, especially if there's a specific artist that you're looking to work with. And so I knew, like, okay, I do need the stability of signing another DC contract that will take me through the next, it was a 3-year contract that I signed in 2018 that'll elapse next September. And that set the stage where it's just like, okay, so now I've got this grounding and all of this, and I can start planning my transition away from superhero stuff. And that was my real goal, because, going back to high school, I don't like people telling me what to do. And I had reached a point in my career that I knew I was ready to sort of challenge myself. And on top of that, I had just done almost 2 full years of not having creator-owned out there, from the end of the Woods, and then I did a short run on a series called Backstagers, which is very close to near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, we skipped Backstagers.
Yeah, but it's that was so. But I did the Backstagers, and that one, and then we did a couple of one-shots with the Backstagers the year following. Yep. But it was something that, for the most part, my day job was nonstop DC Comics for almost 2 full years of writing. And I knew I needed to reprioritize and get more creator-owned back out into the world. And so I was just like, okay, I'm going to re-sign this contract. I'm going to run through the end of that contract. I'm going to ride Justice League Dark and Justice League, through the metal event, and then I'm going to be like out in the world, and I'm going to have all these new series launched. And so I start at that point having a conversation with you guys about okay, I have two projects that I'm interested in doing, and one I saw as the smaller of the two projects, which was a little book called Something is Killing the Children, which I saw as being about a series of 5 one-shots featuring this mysterious character. And every issue, she would arrive in town, kill a monster, and then she would move on to the next town. And it was just going to be like me experimenting with form and format and like having some fun. And yeah, so we like that. Those conversations started in at New York Comic Con 2018, and they would culminate in a conversation early the following year, where I said the other book that I want to do, which is the bigger project, is a multi-year project, is I want to collaborate with the co-creator of The Woods again, Michael Dialynas, and I want to finally tell a story that I came up with back when I was in high school called WYND. Back when I was like still sketching pictures of all of the characters I was coming up with. That was my fantasy epic I came up with when I was 15 years old, and it was time, and I wanted to do that. So I started putting those pieces together, and simultaneous to that, I started putting the pieces together for what I wanted to be my first fully creator-owned book over at Image, and finally, experience the thing, like, because, obviously I have a great working relationship with you guys at Boom, but the difference, like at Image, it's sort of, you got to do everything yourself. And it's like, and that was a creative problem for me that I was interested in experiencing for the first time in my career. So
to draw the distinction for those that are unaware, Image doesn't have an editorial staff. Yeah. And so Image is a great company. So let's be 100% clear and credible. I'm friends with many of the partners, have a personal relationship with them. But Boom, we have an editorial staff, and it's a different style and different working experience, and they offer different things to different people. If you're somebody that wants to do it all yourself, Ed Brubaker is a great example of, wants to do the whole thing. Rick Remender, those guys are focused on doing it all. But, you get creators like Kieran Gillen that, did a lot of Image work, but came to Boom because there was a support structure and a framework that would enable him to do more work. So, everybody's got a different approach. But
the thing that I'll throw in that mix is the thing that keeps me coming back to Boom over and over is the best editor I've ever worked with at any company is Eric Harber, who has been my editor since the first issue of The Woods, and has edited literally everything I've done with the company except for Backstages.
Wow.
And he is, he is my stalwart, person. Like, there are lots of different types of editors in the business. And there are editors who want to collaborate creatively in a way that works great with some writers, but rubs me the wrong way, where it's like someone who wants to basically have ownership of the story with you. And then there are the editors who see exactly what you see in the story and help you execute that story to the best degree. And Eric is the best editor in those terms, and I love working with him, and that's what has kept me coming back to Boom over and over again.
That's great. That's amazing.
Yeah. So that's so cool. Just putting that out in the world. But so I had all these irons in the fire where I saw, like, okay, we've got this ticking clock now, where I've got, I'm working towards the end of this contract. I have these multiple creator-owned projects that are in the works, which is the maximum number of creator-owned projects that I can, because of my contract, get in motion. at this time. And so I've got WYND going, I've got Something Is Killing the Children going, and I've got Department of Truth going. And I reach out to Martin Simmons, who at that point is working on a book called Friendo, or he may have just wrapped Friendo over at Vault, and was going back over for Shelley Bond, her line over at IDW. I think he was doing the follow-up to Punk's Not Dead. And I loved his work, and I particularly loved the work that he was doing on some of his, that he was showing on his Instagram, where he was getting really into really scritchy, inky stuff that was leaning very much into Bill Sienkiewicz feel, a Dave McKean feel. And it was just like, I reached out to him and was like, hey, would you have any interest in just leaning into that part? How can I help you? Is that a direction you're even interested in your artwork to go? And so we started those conversations, and that all led to the Department of Truth. So I knew all of these things were coming, and they were all going to come in 2020. That was going to be the year that all of these pieces really started hitting. Something Is Killing the Children would come out early, but also in my head, that was going to be a 5 issues and done kind of little side project. So I had this whole master plan.
And WYND was a graphic novel.
And WYND was going to be 3 original graphic novels.
Yeah, but that would come out in 2021.
Yeah,
but you were rolling.
Would have been November this year.
That's right. That's right. I apologize. Sorry.
Yeah. So I was building towards all of that. And I was pretty convinced that I was, once I was done working on what became Death Metal and the supporting material to that, I had set up a couple of little side projects that would fulfill the terms of my contract, but I was going to be done writing mainstream, center universe DC Comics stuff. And I was comfortable with the decision. I was very happy with that decision. Then flash forward to May of last year, and that's when I learned that Tom is going to be stepping off of the Batman title, Tom King, with issue 85 at the end of that year, and that the Batman title was available, and they were looking to see who they wanted to fill. And I reached out, and it was just like, I want to throw my hat in the ring. And it was just and it took some, there were a lot of internal debate on my behalf. Do I want to throw my hat in the ring? Is this something I would rather go leave DC for a number of years and then try to come back and take Batman? But there's no guarantee. And this is something that, goes back to the beginning of my career. Your career in comics is all about how do you take the shots that you're given and land them, there are plenty of moments where you have to just sort of step up. And this was a moment.
So that's interesting. So that appeals to you, or is that a reckoning that you've made? Have you decided because again, walking in on Batman 8, it's like walking out to a stadium with 50,000 people in it, and you're on stage and the spotlight's on you, and you have to execute. Is that a scenario that you find yourself, it brings out your best despite your misgivings, or you're drawn to, or?
I think I'm drawn to it. I think I like the challenge, and I like problem solving. And there were a lot of things that I saw as what I would want to do in a Batman run. And there were plenty of things that I knew, and the company had some of their own goals that they were laying out with the character. And they knew, the version of this conversation that we would have 5-10 years from now would be different than the one I'm going to have right now.
Sure.
But there were a lot of limitations and there were specific things that I was meant to do or undo as a part of my taking on the book. And also it's something that like, and I've been open about this, even though I'm pretty sure if I had asked if I could be open about this, they would have told me no, but I said it in my newsletter, so fuck it. Is that I knew that it was going to be a short run. I knew that I was going to have Batman effectively.
How much rope do I get?
Yeah. I knew I was going to have the book until issue 100, and issue 100 would be my last issue. Or there was a chance that issue 99 would be my last issue, so issue 100 would be the launch of a new thing.
Yeah.
So that was what was hanging over my head. And I laid out at that point what would have been it was like 86 to 100. So I think that's about 15 issues. I laid out a 15-issue storyline that was like intricately one big story that was all going to be all about. It was me trying to do my own kind of Hush type thing with a character called the Designer, who in my original version of that pitch was going to turn out to be Bruce Wayne at the end. That basically, that there was this moment early on in Batman's career where to figure out how his greatest foes were going to try to destroy Gotham City, he was going to bring them all together and basically make them lay out all of his plans to him while he was masquerading as this master criminal from like coming in from Europe. And that was the sort of big concept, high concept of the thing. And what we'd realize is that Joker had gotten his hands on those plans and was now unleashing all of them on the city. And, Catwoman and, Riddler and Penguin all think that the Designer is back, this character who like should be dead and should no longer exist. But Batman would know that because he was the Designer back in the day, that something else is going on. So it was going to be this whole like big mystery that laid it out and was going to sort of it was going to happen in multiple stages. And it was going to be kind of, I was trying to do something Hush inspired, because at that point, the goal was for the book it wasn't going to be bi-weekly. It was going to be a monthly run, and Tony Daniel was going to try to draw almost every issue. And so it was like, how can I build a Hush style story with Tony Daniel? And that all started to change. And the people came in and they had their own pieces that they wanted. They told me I couldn't do something. They didn't like the Bruce Wayne angle at the end. They didn't like this, and they wanted to blow up the Joker part of the story to be a bigger part of the story. And this is how comics goes. And once again, ask me in 5 years more about this part of the story. But some things started happening very quickly towards the end of last year, and they really kicked into gear when Ben Abernathy was named the Batman Group editor. And I started working with Ben. And the thing that, because at that point we knew Batman was going to be double ship again, despite the fact that I'd already started writing the first version of the story. And it was already, and I had to change the ending like 6 times while I was doing it. And, but we didn't really have an artist for the key final part of the story, which was going to be this Joker event, at that point untitled, but we were leaning towards calling it Joker War. And it was just like, what can we do to sort of to build that part of the story out? And so they started, and so Ben came in and like on day one, he was just like, I want to try to get Jorge Jimenez to step over and join the Batman group once he's done with the last issue of the Scott Snyder Justice League. And so, and I love Jorge. I've loved Jorge for years. I worked with him years ago on one of my only 2 Marvel credits, Amazing X-Men number 13. Yep. So I'd worked with him before, and I'd been dying to work with him again. And he comes in, and in those first weeks, another element had been happening, which was when I was laying out the story the first time, I had asked if I could use Harley Quinn, and I was told no. Harley Quinn was in Suicide Squad. Harley Quinn was going to be in the movie. They had Harley Quinn plans. They didn't want Harley Quinn in the main Batman book. And I said, fine, okay, I can live with that. But then Tony Daniel drew a cover and included Harley Quinn on the cover. And another mandate at DC at around that time was if something was on the cover, it had to happen in the book.
Wow.
So all of a sudden, I have Harley Quinn back as a character in the story. And that was one of the original pieces that I had wanted. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, okay, I'm taking this piece. The other thing that I had realized is that, okay, if I'm building up towards the big Joker event, which, and there were some things that I knew off the bat. For one, and this is the one that was like making me lose sleep at night, I knew that I was going to be running a Joker event concurrent to the release of Geoff Johns and Jason Fabok's 3 Jokers.
Right.
And so I knew that it's just like, okay, I need to do something different with the Joker. I can't just do a straight up the middle Joker story. I have to throw in some interesting elements and all of that. And one thing that I hadn't seen in a while, especially because Tom King's version and Scott Snyder's version of the Joker was a very solitary devil-like figure. I wanted to bring back the idea of a Joker gang and the idea of him having a bunch of people, a bunch of followers. And I knew to do that well, I needed him to have an interesting number 2 style character. And I had actually pitched about 6 months prior an idea of like, it was sort of like a Black Label or a Mr. Miracle style kind of continuity neutral story that I had pitched a Joker book that was going to not feature the real Joker at all. And it was going to all be about this teenager who would listen to recordings of the Joker and like podcasts about the Joker and start really like connecting with the ideology of the Joker, and then he would start like blacking out at night and then waking up and there was a Joker attack in his city, which was not Gotham. And it was like, why is Joker in the city? And then he would find like there was like a bit of makeup on his cheek or something. And it's like, oh my God, am I turning into the Joker? And it was me trying to do a more like contained horror story like I do in my independent work at DC. But I had that idea in the back of my head, and that character was sort of like, in the ether. And then simultaneous to that, this thing happens with the Harley Quinn cover. And suddenly I have Harley Quinn. So now I have Joker's old number 2, like, is going to be a part of the story. And I'm creating a new number 2. So now that new number 2, by like story math rules, needs to be a kind of dark mirror of Harley. And so it's just like, okay, like if I look at it in a kind of like, devil on a shoulder, if Harley is the angel on the Joker's shoulder, Punchline is the devil. And that was the dynamic that I started playing with in my head. And Jorge was still finishing.
Brilliant.
And Jorge was still finishing the Justice League run, so he couldn't do pages yet, but he could do designs. So we threw the design of Punchline to Jorge, and he knocked it out of the park. And from the second we saw that design, we're like, okay, this character is going to connect. And, I started weaving her in earlier into the story than I was planning on. And a lot of this was the weird benefit to the fact that they kept fucking up my story and pulling all of the pieces out of it and making me rewrite the ending, was that I could shift gears very quickly and start leveling up the pieces of the story that really connected with me, that I was excited about, and they were the original pieces. So I leveled up Punchline to be this crucial character, and once Punchline hit as hard as she hit, I realized that it's like, okay, there is this hunger out there, and it's a hunger that I actually noticed starting with Something Is Killing the Children. But it was something where I think, and this is just my own personal theory, I think young comic book readers right now don't want to read about the characters who are their parents' favorite superheroes and supervillains. I think they want their own characters.
Yep.
And I think that there's been there haven't been that many new characters created and like centered in big titles like Batman in a while. The last one was probably the Court of Owls, in terms of like, we are going to take this brand new concept and make it the big deal. And the Court of Owls is now in movies and TV, or not like animated movies and TV shows and video games. And it's just like, how do you create new pieces like new pieces of mythology that add to the universe and expand it? And so from there, I started developing the idea of Clown Hunter, and then Ghostmaker, who's showing up in the comics now. And it's just like, okay, like creating the new characters is sort of like, is the thing that's going to be the thing that defines my Batman run.
Yeah, I'll tell you that the name Punchline is just staggeringly brilliant. You know, it's so multidimensional. You know, so it's like the ability to have the character's name relate to the Joker.
Yeah.
You know, and then be an action name is, you know, having an action name is so mission critical in superheroes. And, you know, we know that there's a raft of, you know, sort of like misfire character names, you know, that are in both superhero universes, where you're like, you know, this character's kind of a loser, you know, it was a nice shot, you tried a certain idea, but just the underpinnings and the underlying, you know, philosophy and approach, and then to be able to codify it so clearly, you know, creatively, is a real triumph. You know, not to get Stan Lee here for a second, but it really is a triumph. And I think it comes back to that notion of executing on a big stage. You know, it's like, here's my shot, I'm taking it, and I've thought about it, and I've done the work, and I'm going to deliver. And I think that that's so powerful, and, you know, accounts for so much of your success. And, you know, this is not the sniff test, but I'll tell you, it's something, you know, coming from a publisher. You know, I take my girls to the comic shop as much as I can. You know, I can't do it frequently just because of schedules, but I took my 5-year-old into the shop. And if you think from a 5-year-old perspective, how much product is on the wall, right? It's overwhelming, right? It's overwhelming for me, right? And I'm in the business. And we're getting into the car, and she's like, "Who's that?" And she was pointing at Punchline.
That's awesome.
And I was like, how powerful is that character design and sort of the body English and the attitude. And now it's clearly a little girl looking for female characters, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. But beyond that, it was so great to be able, on the drive home, to be able to say, well, that, you know, they know who Harley is.
Yeah.
From, you know, they get all the books that have the superheroes in them. They're like the DK series.
Yeah.
But to be able to sit there and go, okay, you know, Harley left the Joker, this is the new Harley. And then, you know, the Betty and Veronica of it was just blew their minds. You know, it was like, oh, well, they're not going to like each other, you know? And so just having all that baked in conflict, and instantly, very quickly, elliptically, you set up relationships, conflict, and that's this great nest to foster stories out of.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, I think that's another, you know, sort of craft moment of being able to reach and stitch in an ability to generate these ideas. You know, like in the woods, it's so powerful of like, you have a high school, right? And you have like two generative ideas. You've got the high school, which can generate all sorts of stories and characters and can be a lifeline for you if you ever get stuck. And then you've got this alien planet that you just get to unpack and unpack and unpack and unpack. And just when you think you know what's going on, something else happens, right?
Yeah.
And so that sort of not finding yourself pinned down, not finding yourself backed into a corner. And, you know, with Something Is Killing the Children, it's like, you know, the background that you give Erica, you know, is infinite.
Yeah.
And so you can take that character anywhere, do anything. You know, it's the old Wolverine trick, right? Which is like, you know, he steps into a scenario and you meet a new villain and he goes, oh, we meet again. And then all of a sudden, you know, your imagination gives you a cooler version than anybody could ever deliver upon of how they fought previously. And where's the story going to go now?
Yeah.
And so I just think those embedded writer, I would typically say tricks, but I just think that there's so much focus and craft and talent and inspiration that's embedded in there, and you do it so consistently. You know, I think it's very powerful.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
honestly, the one person I'll credit for part of how I build some of that was I had a conversation with Geoff Johns when I was putting together my Detective Comics run, because Geoff sort of he had meetings with every person who was going to be doing a Rebirth book that sort of, like helped lay out what his priorities were and all of that. But the biggest takeaway was he was talking about character and talking about how you need to boil them down to their barest essence. Like if you look at like a character pyramid of all of their different traits, what is the top stone of that pyramid? And from that top stone of the pyramid, it has to be distinct enough that in your cast, that when two characters enter a scene together, the reader is already anticipating what's going to happen in that scene. So then once you can create that and make it, and he was using the example of like, okay, if you like, and part of this was a conversation about Tim Drake, who's my favorite Robin and also Jeff's favorite Robin. He wrote Tim incredibly in his Teen Titans run. And it was about how this is the problem that Tim runs into now that he's no longer ever since he graduated from being Robin, is that every other Robin has a very clear top stone of their pyramid. Like Dick Grayson was the first and the best. Like Jason is the black sheep of the family. And Damian is the actual biological son of Batman and one of Batman's greatest enemies. And so when you put these characters in a room together, just knowing those information, you know that it's like if Jason shows up like in a room with Nightwing, you know how that's gonna shape their interaction. You know how it's gonna shape each of those pieces. And that is the sort of magic that I think we hit on with Punchline. Is Punchline has such a obvious like top stone of being like, and it is clear that like how she would react to Harley, how Harley would react to her. And that's sort of this thing that then when that was put out into the world before she had shown up in a single comic book, like fans were already like, there were fan accounts that were popping up that were writing her effective, like more or less in character, just on her core essence. And it's just like, and they could sort of see these are the kind of dynamic pieces.
That's unreal.
So that was like really validating, and it showed that it's like, okay, how can we kind of boil them down to their bare essence? And it's like that, and it's also like this is also part of my theory of how I'm trying to expand Gotham right now in general, because I think DC fell into a bit of a trap for a while in the New 52 and the years that followed, where some of the characters, their top stones became confusing because certain stories are continuity, certain stories are not continuity. Certain writers have written characters differently than other writers. So when a character shows up in a scene, you're not really sure which version of that character is showing up and how they're going to react and all of that. And then on top of that, there are movies and TV shows that are taking place at various stages in Batman's career and who those characters are shift based on those different moments. And so how do you create new characters right now, like that are at the end of that timeline? Like, this is the current Batman era, and all of the Batman stories and love, they happened in the past, but this is the current era. And how can you create new characters that change character dynamics, just by introducing them into the mix? And that's sort of the challenge, and that's sort of what I'm trying to build. And like, and a key piece of that is like, because obviously my Detective Comics run is my love letter to the Bat family, and most of my Gotham stuff is very rooted in Bat family writing, and I love the Bat family. They're my favorite characters. But I knew I couldn't just do a Batman run that was identical to my Detective Comics run. I needed to lean away from the family. But I still wanted to create young, new characters who are reacting to other forces in Gotham in the same way that the Bat family, like, it were spun off of Batman. Like, I wanted to create kind of a new Bat family that was like built out of a city that has grown up in the middle of Batman fighting all of these villains, and like, who are those characters? What would they be? And that's sort of the dynamic that I'm trying to do.
I mean, Clown Hunter, we could do another 15 minutes on, of just like there's so much embedded cleverness in it. It's amazing. But I want to make the transition to Something Is Killing the Children.
Yeah.
And talk to me about, sort of Erica and sort of the, I'll be this guy. Where did the idea come from? Because I know the writer question that most writers don't like.
See, and this is the weird thing with Something Is Killing the Children, because normally I am a very outline-driven, like crazy long pitch, like, like that's the sort of writer I am. Like Department of Truth had a 20-page pitch. Like,
wow.
The Woods had, I think, a 16-page pitch. Like my ideas I ramble, like both on Zoom and in Word documents.
Yep.
And it was something that I wanted to lay out. Honestly, my initial thoughts on Something Is Killing the Children. It's a title that I've been attached to forever. I think the first time I used the title Something Is Killing the Children was for a short story I turned in college. Wow. I've been in love with that title ever since. I even pitched to you guys a separate concept called Something Is Killing the Children that never made it to a pitch document because it was never cooked enough. But actually the stuffed octopus actually comes from that iteration of the story. But I was coming up with all of those pieces, but I wanted to do something very simple that was about a monster hunter. And I saw this character in my head who is just this small blonde woman in her 20s who just had deep rings under her eyes, who looked like she was exhausted and beaten down by the world, who arrives on a Greyhound bus in a small town, and she gets off that bus and she is going to fight and kill a monster using her wits and whatever material she can get her hands on. And then she's not going to say anything or to any of the locals or anything. She's going to get back on that bus and she's going to go to the next town and she's going to do it again. And again and again and again. And part of the idea was that kind of relentlessness. And that was something that really drove me to the character, because I think that there's something in that is essentially the millennial experience where.
Ooh, interesting. Tell me more.
I think my generation has grown up in a world that has proven pretty succinctly that the systems don't work. But even though the systems don't work, we still have to keep living and we have to still keep functioning, and you still have to try to do good, even in a society that doesn't reward it or value it. And when
you say the systems don't work, what I process is I go 9/11, the financial crisis.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah. And just the idea of school debt and all of these different things that are pressures that means it is harder for our generation. Our generation has no accumulated wealth, even though now we are entering our mid 30s and trying to start families and stuff. And
so they're Erica.
And that's Erica, and Erica is still trying to make her way in this world. So there's that essence that isn't up front and center, but I think is core to who she is. But I had that picture, and I had the idea. It's and in my head, it was in one issue she's gonna fight a werewolf in Minnesota, and one issue she's gonna fight a dragon in Alabama. That was the sort of thing that was in my head. And I had these rough ideas that she works for a monster hunting order that we were never going to see or really understand. We were just going to she was going to call them on her flip phone, and we don't really know, much more than that. And then a few things started coming together. So that was the initial pitch: 5 issues, 5 standalone one-shots. And the goal was to do something like the old Hellblazer type of stories where it's just like sometimes she wasn't even going to be the main character in the story. Like you might do an entire story from the perspective of the bartender at a bar, and then it's just like people coming in telling stories about her and doing a kind of Rashomon. Like it was me like kind of letting loose and doing a bunch of shit that I wouldn't be allowed to do at DC. That would just be me unwinding. And I started writing the first issue, and I put together and I wrote this opening scene, which is this truth or dare scene that ended with that, and it was running a little long, like, and that was the first kind of flag that set off in my head, where it's just like, I'm this many pages into the issue and she still needs to, like, Erica Slaughter needs to show up, kill the monster, and then leave again by the end of the issue. And it's just like, and I started realizing, okay, maybe the whole first 5 issues takes place all in one town, and that sets the stage. And so I start expanding the story, but I was expanding the story with no plan, no roadmap, absolutely no idea where the story was going.
Just very unlike you.
Very unlike me. But I just sort of followed my gut, and I was feeling it. And then I started feeling it even more when Werther Dell'Edera turned in the first designs for Erica. And that was the first time that I really I think I felt the book when I saw that art. Because before that, I think that there was a kind of, like, tonally, the book was going to be a bit more, like it was all one thing. It was all going to be, like, kind of tonally consistent. But then I saw this character, and this character design is almost a superhero adjacent design. Like, she has a costume, like she has the mask, and the mask was something Werther brought to the table. The mask, not part of the initial designs. Like, I was thinking more of a John Constantine Hellblazer style character, where, like, yes, she might have a distinctive jacket, but it's not like she's, like, in a uniform. But then once I saw that, it's like, oh, this is me telling a story set in a grounded real world where suddenly a superhero comes to town to stop, like, and doing a grounded horror story that kind of had those priorities. And that like, kind of, I started feeling my way through it. And it was when I was starting writing the third issue was when I texted Eric Harburn again, where I was just like, I can't finish this story in 5 issues. Like, I can't, like, this story is not going to reach a conclusion at issue 5. And I think I need more issues here. And
how much rope can I have?
Yeah. And that really, and once I was really in it, it's like I felt the story. I knew what the story could be, and I knew where it was going. And at that moment, I finally did lay out a full plan of, like, okay, I can get to the end of this initial narrative by issue 15. So I want 3 arcs, like, that can get me to the end of this story in Archer's Peak, but it's going to be an expansive story that keeps building out from there. And it's just like, so I was aiming towards 15 as the end point of the series. And, but, like, I had no idea whether or not, like, I did, like, at this point, I had no idea, to be blunt, whether or not anyone wanted to read this book. And this this was a little side project that I was sort of doing, and I was on my Justice League Dark. I hadn't been announced on Batman, and there was no telling I was going to get the rope to tell the longer version. And so I just kind of had to hope that I did. And thankfully, the people responded really, really strongly to issue 1. And at that moment, it was just like, okay, then we have the rope to get to issue 15. And then beyond, and then, like, as it continued to grow in success, now I think we're like, there isn't an end point, like, and that is very exciting to me.
Yeah, it is. The scope, I think, is tremendous. Sort of, that comes back to sort of the frameworks that you're working in, the generative, I think that's a hallmark of, Backstagers has it. You know, it's like, what's under the stage? And, you know, that's a huge toy box that you can unpack and unpack and unpack and unpack. And you have a great, you know, ensemble group of characters. So, you know,
I credit a lot of that to being effectively raised on Vertigo books, especially like 90s and early 2000s Vertigo books, where they were long form world building series. And by being long form world building series, like you can veer off into weird little corners. It's not about reaching an end to a single narrative. Once you have created this world, you tell multiple stories set in this world that happen one after the other, and it builds on that. And yes, there might still be a singular piece that you want to accomplish by the end, but it is this like building beast of a thing where like it, you know, it opens up doors to doing the sorts of things that I loved, that made me love Sandman, where like, you know, now that there isn't an end point to something is killing the children, I could do that Rashomon style issue of a bartender, like, and I probably will.
I was about to say,
you know,
this is coming.
It's open, like it opens the door to veering down side alleys, and those side alleys often help define the center, the core of the series and the heart of the book, even more than doing like just a very self-contained, condensed version of the story. And I think that I do my best work when I am not constrained to tell it in the shortest number of issues.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty fascinating. I think there's a deep archetypal power to Erica, you know. And I think certainly the way that you imbue emotionally the determination, and sort of it's a mixture of this is my job and I'm going to do it, but it's also this is what I'm sentenced to. And I think people relate to that because that is universal. You know, there's a lot of sort of like, I didn't choose to be born in this town, but you know, I am, or I didn't expect to be doing this job, but I am, you know, literally in my day-to-day life. So I think a lot of those things are very, very powerful. But how do I ask the next question? And I think this is going to be the closer. Do you see that the book will be limited to one expression? That is a very mysterious way to ask that question. Careful.
Yeah. I mean, what I think I can say is that, you know, thanks to the response, and the response has been overwhelming and incredible. And especially since the release of the first volume earlier this summer, the fact that stores are telling me they can't keep that first volume in stock, and the fact that sales have gone up every issue since the release of that volume, down to the fact that the one that came out this week, issue 11, actually outsold the first issue, in all of its printings, which is incredible and does not happen. And that is
never
enormously gratifying. And, you know, one thing that is unique in compared to a lot of my creator-owned work is that this isn't a self-contained story. This is about a world, and that world is bigger than just Erica. And some of the very exciting conversations we've been having is, what would it look like if there were multiple books that were taking place in that world? And I think that's about as much as I can say.
So we'll just leave with that tantalizing tidbit, but thank you for giving me such a staggering amount of time.
Yeah, no,
that's incredible.
I told you yesterday I rambled, so I'm a good person.
Well, and see, then I get all confused because then I'm like, but maybe I should be saying get back to work.
Oh yeah, no. I legit Like I'm using you as an excuse.
Yeah, right.
Eric,
Yep, I'm gonna get
where the pages are for the next issue.
I'm gonna get the Matt Gagnon. Eric's gonna complain to Matt, and that's gonna give me a talking to. It'll be great. It's the usual Matt Gagnon, Ross Ritchie role reversal where I end up feeling like the student called to the principal's office. And so, but you know, it's the job I signed up for. So love you, brother. You're incredible. What a staggering talent. We'll do a sequel to this sometime. It might be a while, but my thought process will be the next go round. I want to get into Joseph Campbell, and I love the Geoff Johns sort of topstone character theory. And I think that stuff for writers and for people who love writers is very powerful and fascinating. And I think a lot of artists would get a kick out of it as well. So again, thank you. You're spectacular, amazing. And thank you for taking a chance on us at Boom. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having me. And also, I just want to hijack your platform 1 second to say that I have a horror a horror anthology series that I am self-publishing. This is my weird quarantine baby that the second issue is out now. You can order it on readrazorblades.com. This is just me making a bunch of weird, scary comics with my friends. We have like really, really amazing people. We have pieces by Jen Bartel in the second issue, Matt Rosenberg, myself, Josh Hickson, and a whole bunch of others. But yeah, you should go on to readrazorblades.com and put it in an order, and let me keep making my weirdo.
I bought two.
Thank you very much.
Of course, of course. Yes, absolutely. And where can the fans find you on the interwebs?
I am on Twitter at James IV, all spelled out.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, brother. Thank you again.
All right.
And we'll see you soon.
Okay, bye.
Okay, so how much fun was that? How incredible is it to hear Tynion talk about how influential that Geoff Johns moment was with the capstone of a character, that sort of idea of the one significant character trait is the thing that makes all the difference in how he writes his characters. So I loved that interview. Thank you so much for watching it. I really appreciate your time. Make sure that you subscribe and make sure you hit the like button. Please comment below. Tell me if you enjoyed it. Tell me which part of the interview you really had a good time with. Tell me what you'd like to see more of. And I will meet you there in the comments section. We'll have a conversation back and forth. And make sure that you hit the subscribe bell so that the next time that I upload a creator interview, you don't miss it. So thanks again for watching this interview. I really appreciate it. And talk to you soon.